On today's episode, we take a look at the latest in the Richmond Coaching race, who is still in contention for the top 8, and we take a look at some trade targets for Melbourne and North Melbourne. All that and more on today's episode of Zero Hanger TV. All right, so straight into it, we have 2 weeks left in the 2023 season. So Mitch, who can make the 8?
Tons of clubs. Still plenty left with a fortnight to go. I think it's about 12 clubs all up that can make it. Obviously, I think the top 4 have just about booked theirs in. Carlton pretty much as well. Mathematically can fall out, but very, very unlikely they do. Starting at the top though, in the minor premiership, it's really on the line this Friday night, Brisbane versus Collingwood, Marvel Stadium. The Lions win, that keeps their chances of winning the minor premiership alive. Collingwood win, they'll take it. And I think they probably deserve to, but it's going to be a really tight contest given how both of those clubs are playing. Port can also win it, but would need a big percentage boost and a lot to work in their favour.
Yeah. So who's sitting with Essendon in that sort of spot where you need wins?
Yeah, there's a few clubs, as you mentioned here, Bombers one, St Kilda another. So those two will play Collingwood and Brisbane in the last rounds. So that'll be quite an interesting outcome just to see how those two clubs are going. The Saints pretty much need just about one win. I think they can fall if they don't, but a lot would have to go against them for them to pick up a win and still miss. And then, a few clubs sitting with them. We've got Sydney and the Western Bulldogs are in the top 8 at the moment. Swans on a 5-game winning streak. Couple of tougher fixtures coming up though against Adelaide and then Melbourne to finish their season. So they're in, which is good, but it's going to be a harder 2 games compared to most for them to pick up a perfect run home. And they've got a lot of clubs breathing down their neck. So Bombers are sitting behind the Dogs just on percentage, so just sitting outside the 8 on percentage, as are GWS. They're all level on points. Behind them, each of these 3 separated on by 2 points each is Geelong, Adelaide and Richmond. The Crows have an easier fixture coming home. Now they'll play Sydney this week, so certainly not a walk for them. But if they can win that one, then they'll head over to their final game to play West Coast. Very winnable game, as winnable as they get, you'd say. So the Crows are certainly a chance. Richmond, very hard for them to get through, but still that term mathematically can be thrown in there as well. So just to go off some of those contending clubs and who each club's playing. So St Kilda, tough run to finish. Geelong and Brisbane. It's probably why, albeit how well they're sitting in the top 8, some might still have them falling out. Sydney, as we mentioned, Adelaide and Melbourne. The Western Bulldogs have West Coast this weekend, so that's going to be quite helpful for them. And then they'll play Geelong in the final round. Essendon, GWS and Collingwood. That's another tough few games. The Giants and Bombers, pretty much an elimination final this week. Whoever loses that is probably out, and whoever wins it, a great chance of finishing in the top 8. Then GWS, as mentioned, play Essendon this week and then go up against Carlton, who they're hoping sitting quite comfortable by round 24 and aren't banking on a win. And they'll have an easier opponent, albeit the Blues are still a top 5 club at the moment. Geelong, St Kilda and the Western Bulldogs, certainly not a walk in the park for them, but that first game, they've got at least a game at home and they'll be banking on adding to a couple wins to end their season. They'll be needing both though to make the 8. Sydney and West Coast for Adelaide, as we mentioned before, and then Richmond, North Melbourne and Port. You could probably bank on them winning one, losing one, but they're going to need to win both and have a lot work in their favour. So that's it. It's, like I said, there's a lot that can play out and a lot that will play out, but it's a very tight and contested final 2 weeks.
Exciting stuff. So if you had to take a pick, who are you liking?
I think the Saints might get up in one of their games. I think the Dogs will stay in, and it's really going to come down, I think, GWS or Essendon for that other spot. I don't see Sydney winning both of the games, maybe one, but I'll say the Giants as that third club. Cats probably just unlucky as well.
Yeah, I did famously write off the Swans pretty early on, so
a few did.
I'm going to go with GWS as well. All right, so exciting stuff. We'll probably come down to the wire, but now we're going to take a look at the Richmond Coaching race. So a couple of people have pulled out and it's narrowed. So what are we looking at here?
Yeah, we spoke about it last week on just kind of early and who could be, and now it's come out in the last week or so, a bit of a short list, not in the full list, but some names have either pressing their case now or some have pulled out. So AFL.com have reported a few names that are in consideration and some that aren't pushing their candidacy. So Chris Newman, former Richmond Tiger and captain, and a Box Hill assistant. Hawthorn assistant, former Box Hill senior coach as well. So he's one that's in. So I think he was flagged early days that he could be a chance given his ties to Richmond. But a few that are out. Josh Carr's a big one. staying at Port Adelaide. Will work again likely with Ken Hinkley from next year, and could be the man that eventually succeeds him at Alberton Oval. A couple others, Troy Chaplin, who was one we mentioned last week. Sounds like he's not partaking in the process either, another former Tiger, but will be remaining with Melbourne, it sounds like. And Jamie Graham, another highly regarded assistant over in WA, he won't be partaking in it, according to AFL.com. So there are a few outs, and that report itself has also suggested that the Tigers are looking for a coach who has senior coaching experience, not necessarily at the top level, but maybe at state league level. So that's something that Josh Carr had. That's something that I guess Chris Newman has when he was at Box Hill. Guys like Jan Siracusa, Ash Hansen, and then you look at Andrew McWalter. He's got that on an interim basis. So that who that goes against is probably someone like Adam Uze, who's been pushing for a senior coaching job in the last year or so, and doesn't have a senior coaching experience so much. Has always been an assistant at an AFL club. Has done a lot of work with Melbourne, but that might work against him. If he wants to pursue the Richmond job.
Yep. Interesting stuff. All right. So moving over to our rookie rankings. So not a whole lot of movement, just a few places swapping.
Yeah. So just I guess four players moved in total for 2 swaps. So it's just starting at the top, and it'll stay the same. I think these top 2 for the last couple of weeks. Harry Sheasel at 1. Will Ashcroft at 2, that swapped last week, and Sheasel was solid on the weekend against Essendon, and with Ashcroft's season over, those 2 will pretty much stay there. Podium swap though, so Max Michelani moving up into 3rd, Bailey Humphrey down to 4th, Judd McVie holding 5th spot, and then 6th and 7th have swapped, so Ruben Jimmy's fallen back one, another player whose season ended quite early, and Josh Weddle comes up to his place into 6th, and then Elijah Hewitt holding his place at 8th. So yeah, a little bit of change, but nothing too dramatic. But 2 weeks to go, could certainly see a bit more before the end of the season.
Absolutely. Honourable mentions?
Yeah, a few. Elijah Sardis, George Wardlaw from that Bombers Roos game, a couple of ex-teammates going at it, so that was great to see. Jacob Bauer, I thought was impressive for Richmond. Probably the best of the lot over the weekend was Matt Johnson for Freo in that Western Derby win. So yeah, there are a couple of the guys and a couple of them have been in our rankings earlier this year. Hard to see them coming back in, but a big couple of weeks could certainly be on offer.
Yep. Interesting. All right, so moving over to some trade targets, we'll take a look at Melbourne first. So who are Melbourne looking at coming into the season?
Well, yeah, we'll try and figure out. They're been an interesting one, Melbourne. Do they want to go for a ruckman if they're losing Grundy? Do they want to go for a forward with kind of the injuries and players they've got on their list and uncertainty there? So, there probably are some other options that might just fit list needs or good role players. So some of the more unlikely ones that we've mentioned, Kane Farrell, Jake Waterman, Jack Petrocelli. So there's a halfback for them there, a speedy wing half forward who can also offer run from the back line like Farrell can in Petrocelli. And then Waterman's kind of that 3rd tall forward that they're probably wanting, or the 2nd tall forward that they probably want next to a Van Rooyen and in between a Fritsch. So there's a couple they've considered. Pick one, this is one we've done I think only once or twice so far this year, but I think there'll be chips in on pick one if it's over at the Eagles. They've got 3 first-round picks heading into this year's off-season with both of their own for this year and next year, as well as Fremantle's, which is like a top pick for the 2023 draft. So they certainly have the assets to gain pick one. And then another one as well, Tom Fullerton, who can play forward, can play ruck, and has a little bit of experience. And they probably just need someone to be a part of a succession plan for Max Gawn if they're not going to have Brodie Grundy on their books next year.
Yep, interesting stuff. I think Harley Reid will look pretty good in the red and blue for me. We'll also take a look at some trade targets for North Melbourne. So obviously big rebuild. So what are they going to be looking at in terms of trading?
Yeah, similar. So a lot of their focus will be on the draft. So it's kind of harder to gauge, what kind of experienced players they'll be going after. But they certainly will be looking to get some players in, I would have thought, at some point this off season. So similar to Melbourne in a way, maybe a ruck, if they lose Todd Goldstein to retirement, or if he isn't offered a contract next year, there's probably a spot there to back up Tristan Cherry. So we've gone for someone like Jordan Sweet, who I think can offer a lot of competition, wouldn't just be a 2nd string ruckman, but can really fight for a senior spot at Arden Street. A couple of Blues players, Paddy Dow, Zach Fisher. Dow's off contract, has shown some decent efforts in midfield over recent weeks since being a part of their starting side. And with the Roos losing guys like Ben Cunnington, Aaron Hall, there's some options there to offer some runs. Zach Fisher can be quite similar, has played as a defender in recent weeks for the Blues, and if that's a position he could take somewhere else, then he could fill in that Aaron Hall role. They lose Jack Siebel as well to retirement. A couple others, they want a forward. It's not going to cost them much. They can certainly kick goals. Chris Burgess, last year's VFL leading goal kicker. I think he's second this year as well. So he's doing heaps at the state league level. And a defender for them, if they lose someone like Ben Mackay, would be someone like Lewis Malikan, off contract, won't cost a lot. So a lot of the guys we've gone for North, they're not going to have to give away any of their decent draft picks. They can still pocket those for the future and get in some good young talent. But if there's some late picks that they can pull in, then there's some cheaper guys for them there.
Yep. All right. Well, that wraps it up for Zero Hanger TV this week. Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks, Phoenix.
Don't forget, we'll be doing our mailbag on Thursday. So if you want to send something in to us, a hot take, a talking point, or just a question, make sure to follow us on all our socials. Don't forget, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel and catch all the latest AFL news at zerohanger.com.